Ancient Rome is always associated with greatness and power, but behind its marble columns and triumphal arches were hidden secret signs, curses, and mystical predictions. Emperors sought advice from oracles, priests performed rituals in underground sanctuaries, and the people believed in spirits that could change the fate of the empire. These mysteries still cause anxiety and curiosity, so today we will analyze 30 mysteries of ancient Rome that remain unanswered. The Curse of Carthage, the legend that Rome fell because of oaths sworn by the priests of Carthage. The history of the confrontation between Rome and Carthage has always been perceived as a clash of two civilizations equally hungry for dominance in the Mediterranean. The three Punic Wars have become a symbol of merciless struggle, where there was no room for mercy. But alongside the chronicles of military campaigns and strategic victories, legends have been preserved in which the fall of Rome was explained not only by political crises and barbarian invasions, but also by an ancient curse pronounced by Carthaginian priests in the last days of the city. In 146 BC, the Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, stormed Carthage after a 3-year siege, reducing it to complete exhaustion. When the city's walls collapsed, the inhabitants experienced horrors the likes of which had hardly been seen in the ancient world. For 17 days, Roman soldiers destroyed houses, temples, and sanctuaries, reducing everything to ashes. It is known that in the temple of the god Baal and the goddess Tanit, priests and priestesses performed the last rites, sacrificing themselves and uttering curses on those who destroyed their city. According to legend, they called upon the powers of the underworld and the sea gods to bring retribution upon Rome centuries later, and so that even the greatest emperors would not be able to escape the predicted punishment. The Romans burned the houses and fields of Carthage, covering the land with salt to prevent the harvest from ever coming. This act of symbolic destruction was perceived as the city's final wiping from the face of the earth. But in the minds of the people, it took on a different meaning. The salt scattered over the ruins became a symbol not only of emptiness, but also of a magical seal concealing a sinister power. They said that the spirit of Carthage rose into the sky with the flames, and the curse was carried away with the smoke of the sacrificial fires, which in the future was to return to the heart of Rome itself. Legends of the curse were passed down from generation to generation, and they spread especially actively in the later times of the empire when its power began to wane. Christians and pagans alike found in them an explanation for their misfortunes. Some saw Rome's fall as retribution for its cruelty to Carthage, while others claimed that the spirits of the vanquished were stronger than human will. Even the famous historian Augustine of Aurelius, who lived in North Africa, mentioned popular rumors linking the decline of the empire to the prayers of Carthaginian priests. A special place in legends was occupied by the figure of the high priest Baal, who, before his death, was believed to have sworn an oath that the descendants of the Romans would suffer the same horrors that his people endured. His voice, mingled with the roar of the flames, supposedly pierced through time. In later centuries, it was said that during the barbarian invasions, when Germans and Goths captured Rome, echoes of this voice could be heard in the air above the ruined temples. The mystique was heightened by coincidences. In the 4th and 5th centuries, it was the North African Vandal tribes that dealt Rome one of its fatal blows, ravaging its lands and seizing its riches. This was perceived as a symbolic return of Carthage. The land once cursed by salt seemed to come alive in the hands of new barbarians, and Africa itself delivered vengeance to the heart of the empire. Not only the fall of Rome was linked to this curse, but also the tragedies of individual emperors. Nero, obsessed with ideas of grandeur and the element of fire, seemed to repeat the fate of the Carthaginian temples when flames engulfed the capital. Commodus, who surrounded himself with mystics and Eastern cults, fell at the hands of conspirators, as if embodying the idea that no power can silence ancient curses. Skeptics attributed these legends to superstition and a search for convenient explanations for the crises that befell the empire. But for ancient people, belief in curses was part of everyday life. They saw the series of disasters not as a coincidence, but as a pattern laid out by the priests of the lost city. Even today, when examining the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists find traces of sacrificial fires and inscriptions that are difficult to interpret. Some of them mention the gods of the underworld and appeal to forces capable of punishing enemies. These fragments of inscriptions reinforce the sense that the curse myth had real ritual roots. Thus, the history of the confrontation between Rome and Carthage turned out to be not only a political and military episode, but also a symbol of the eternal memory of destruction and retribution. For the ancient mind, the idea that even the greatest power could fall because of words spoken in the smoke of a destroyed temple was natural. And it was precisely this idea that made the legend of the Curse of Carthage one of the darkest and most disturbing pages in the mystical history of ancient Rome. The ghost of Nero, supposedly wandering the ruins of the Golden Palace. Nero's name has been shrouded in legend and fear since the first centuries after his death. He was remembered as a mad emperor, a arsonist of Rome, a tormentor of Christians, and also as a man whose life ended in despair and humiliation. But for the inhabitants of the capital, the story did not end with his death. It was believed that Nero's spirit never found peace, and still wanders among the ruins of the Golden Palace, reminding them of the crimes and curses of his reign. The Golden Palace, or Domus Aurea, was built after the fire of 1164, when vast swathes of the city were reduced to ashes. On the site of the burned-out quarters, Nero ordered the construction of a residence of unprecedented scale. Marble, gilding, frescoes depicting fantastical creatures, artificial lakes and groves transformed the palace into a world torn from reality. This structure symbolized not grandeur, but the emperor's obsession, and it later became the place where his spirit was bound. After Nero's suicide in 68 CE, his body was buried on the slope of the Esquiline Hill. But rumors of his return began to spread almost immediately. People claimed to have seen him at night among the columns of the palace, a figure in a white robe, with a strange glow around his face. It was said that this was punishment for his life of murder and betrayal, and that the soul of the emperor was forced to wander where he erected the symbol of his pride. Nero redivivus. Nero returning to life was ingrained in the Roman people. Throughout the years, impostors emerged claiming to be the emperor, and belief in his possible return was so strong that it was perceived as reality. For the people of Rome, Nero's ghost became a sign that evil does not vanish without a trace, and that destructive passions return, no matter how deeply buried. And excavations were conducted within the ruins of the Golden Palace, and each time, disturbing stories were associated with them. Footsteps and the sounds of music were said to be heard within the underground halls, as if Nero were once again enjoying a feast with long-dead guests. Some chronicles mention that slaves and soldiers avoided spending the night near the palace, fearing to encounter its ghost. For Christians, Nero's ghost became a symbol of eternal retribution. He was considered the personification of the Antichrist, a harbinger of the end times. Apocrypha claimed that his spirit would wander until the Last Judgment, and for this reason many associated nighttime visions in ruins with prophecies of the coming catastrophe. Even centuries later, when the palace was buried and new buildings were erected in its place, the legends persisted. Renaissance artists descending into the underground grottos described a strange silence and coldness that seemed to emanate from the walls. This reinforced the belief that the Golden Palace held not only the splendor of ancient art, but also the mark of a curse left by its creator. Thus, the image of Nero's ghost became part not only of Rome's mystical history, but also of the collective fear of the society that outlived his rule. His spirit was perceived as a warning that tyranny and cruelty never go away without a trace. And while the ruins of the Golden Palace preserve the memory of its creator, legends of his wandering ghost continue to haunt the imagination, transforming history into a living mysticism where the boundaries between past and present are blurred. The mystery of Roman aqueducts, rumors of secret underground passages and sunken sanctuaries. The aqueducts of ancient Rome have always amazed the imagination with their scale and engineering genius. These gigantic structures stretched for tens of kilometers, rising above the ground in arches and penetrating deep into the hills to supply the capital and the provinces with water. However, along with the admiration of the Romans and their descendants, the aqueducts also gave rise to fears and legends. After all, under the massive stone vaults, among the damp echoes and eternal darkness, were hidden not only water channels, but also secret stories about sanctuaries that disappeared into the dungeons, and passages leading to places where even soldiers did not dare to enter. Even in antiquity, there were rumors that aqueducts were built for more than just water. Some claim that some of the underground galleries connected to temples and secret halls intended for mystical rituals. Chronicles mention that the priests of Mithras and followers of Eastern gods performed their rituals deep in the vaults, where the damp walls were covered in soot from torches, and the silence heightened the effect of mystery. Sacrifices and oaths, known only to a select few, were supposedly performed in such places. Particularly mysterious stories are associated with the Claudian Aqueduct, one of the most impressive structures. According to legend, In its underground section, there was a passage leading to a sunken sanctuary where the guardians of the waters worshipped the goddess dwelling in the springs. It was said that the entrance was sealed by the engineers themselves after a series of accidents. Workers disappeared without a trace, and the water in the canals suddenly turned dark and became undrinkable. The people of Rome believed that aqueducts could serve as portals to the world of underground spirits. At night, watchmen heard strange sounds, like the hum of prayers, the sound of footsteps, or the splashing of water where there shouldn't be any. This is where the tradition of leaving small gifts at the entrances to the aqueducts arose: bread, fruit, or coins, to appease the invisible guardians. In later times, when the empire began to weaken, new legends were added. The barbarians who captured Rome reported finding halls with altars and images of creatures unknown to their people carved into the walls inside the aqueducts. For them, this was proof that the Romans possessed a special connection with dark forces that had entered into a pact of power with them. Archaeologists exploring the aqueducts in modern times did indeed find strange niches and walls with incomprehensible inscriptions and symbols. Some of these did not correspond to Latin script and were more reminiscent of Eastern cult symbols. They also discovered places resembling small sanctuaries where secret rituals may have taken place. But their purpose has never been fully explained. In popular memory, aqueducts remain not only engineering marvels but also gateways to an unknown world. Legends of sunken sanctuaries continue to live on today, arousing the interest of researchers and lovers of mysticism. And although the official history explains everything in terms of practical purposes, the feeling that secret passages to other worlds are hidden in the depths of these stone tunnels remains strong. After all, in the silence of ancient dungeons, one can hear echoes of the past, in which reality and mysticism intertwine like water and stone, leaving no clear boundary between them. About the Dracula and the Temple of Apollo in the Cumaean Grottos. Among the ancient mystical sites of Italy, the Cumaean Grottos, located near Naples, held a special place. There, deep within the dark cliffs, stood the Temple of Apollo and the famous sanctuary of the Cumaean Sibyl, a priestess considered the conduit of the god's will and whose prophecies could change the destinies of entire nations. For the Romans, this place was surrounded by an aura of fear and awe because emperors and ordinary people came here, hoping to hear words about the future, and no one left it without the feeling that they had come into contact with something beyond. According to legend, the grottos were a complex labyrinth of corridors extending deep into the rock. Their walls were covered with symbols and traces of ancient torches, and the air inside was always cold and heavy, as if one were breathing not only earthly air but also the breath of other worlds. It was believed that the Sibyl lived here, in the stone halls, where reality dissolved in the twilight, and the words spoken by her lips did not belong to human logic. The prophecies of the Cumaean Sibyl were often cryptic and dark. She spoke in allegories that could be interpreted in a variety of ways. Thus, her famous prediction about the fate of Troy and the future greatness of Rome became part of Virgil's Aeneid, where Aeneas's encounter with the Sibyl in the grottos is described as a transition from the world of the living to the realm of shadows. For the ancient Romans, this episode was not just a literary image, but a reflection of real ideas that the Cumaean grottos were the gateway to the underworld. Priests, warriors, and even politicians flocked here to seek advice from the gods. Emperors, including Augustus, sent ambassadors to receive prophecies about wars and power. The Sibyl was believed to draw her visions from the breath of the earth itself. In the grottos, there were crevices from which vapors rose, and these vapors put her into a trance, allowing her to utter words that were perceived as the voice of Apollo. Mysticism was reinforced by a special relationship with the Sibylline books, a collection of prophecies supposedly compiled by priestesses. According to legend, the Cumaean Sibyl herself offered the books of prophecies to King Tarquinius, but when he refused because of the high price, she burned some of them. Only after this did the king agree to purchase the remaining ones, and they began to be kept in Rome, serving as a vital reference point for the state. The destruction of these books was later perceived as a loss not only of historical heritage, but also of the empire's defense. Skeptics claim that the Sibyl's prophecies were cleverly crafted allegories, interpreted to suit everyone's needs. But for the people of Rome, the words from the Cumaean grottos carried the weight of fate. If the Sibyl spoke of impending disasters, people believed that no armies or laws could stop them. If she predicted victory, it bolstered their confidence even in the most difficult times. Today, archaeologists are still exploring the ruins of Com, finding traces of underground halls and corridors that retain the echoes of ancient rituals. But even with a rational approach, the sense of mysticism lingers. In the cold stone walls, winding passages, and echoing whisper of the wind, many sense the breath of history, where legend and reality intertwine. And so, the legend of the Cumaean oracles remains one of the most disturbing secrets of Rome, a reminder that faith and prophecy can be stronger than the sword and the army, and that a word spoken in the darkness of a grotto can change the fate of an empire. In the prophetic dreams of Julius Caesar before his assassination, the story of Julius Caesar's death is known to everyone, but in the shadow of the act of murder itself, which took place on the Ides of March in the year 44 BC, remains one of the most disturbing pages: the omens and prophetic dreams that preceded his last hours. These stories, collected by ancient authors, have become overgrown with mysticism over the centuries, and turned the murder of the great commander not only into a political conspiracy, but also into the fulfillment of a prophecy that could not be avoided. Ancient chroniclers claim that just a few days before the fateful Senate session, Caesar began complaining to those close to him that he was tormented by disturbing dreams. In one of them, he saw himself hovering over the city like a spirit torn from his body, and Rome bowing before him not as a living ruler, but as a dead symbol. In another dream, he imagined his own house filled with blood, and a statue of Pompey, an enemy he had once crushed, coming to life in ominous silence. These images left a trace of anxiety in his soul, but Caesar's habit of not showing fear forced him to dismiss them as mere obsessions. Of particular significance was Calpurnia, his wife, who, according to Plutarch and Suetonius, saw the roof of their house collapse the night before the tragedy, and Caesar lying stabbed to death in her arms. She begged her husband not to go to the Senate, and even asked servants to detain him at home under the pretext of illness. But Caesar, accustomed to defying fate, merely chuckled, although he admitted to friends that a strange premonition lingered in him. Interestingly, the Romans themselves viewed dreams not as personal experiences, but as signs from the gods. For them, visions and dreams could be a sign of the future, and even a way to communicate with higher powers. Therefore, the dreams of Caesar and his wife were perceived as warnings that he ignored. Even more ominous was the scene described later by historians. Shortly before leaving the house, a soothsayer named Sparinus appeared to him, having already warned him about the Ides of March. When Caesar half-jokingly asked if that day had arrived, the soothsayer replied that the day had arrived, but was not yet over. These words only heightened the aura of fatality, as if a chain of prophecies and dreams was inexorably leading to a tragic denouement. The visions and premonitions did not stop Caesar. He entered the Senate, where he was surrounded by conspirators, and at that moment all the images of the night came true. Blood really did cover his body and clothes, and the statue of Pompey was desecrated by his death. It was at its foot that he fell under the blows of daggers. In the eyes of his contemporaries, this looked not just like murder, but the fulfillment of a prophetic vision, predetermined in advance. These dreams and omens still haunt the imagination of historians and mystics. They demonstrate that even the greatest of men, having reached the pinnacle of power, remained vulnerable to the fears of the night and to those secret signs that the ancients considered the voice of the gods. The question remains open. Were these coincidences, a game of the subconscious, or was fate itself trying to stop Caesar by sending him visions that he did not want to hear? And so, the story of Julius Caesar's prophetic dreams continues to live as a reminder that even the most powerful empires and the greatest men are powerless before the mystery of destiny, and that dreams can tell more than daytime prophecies. Prophecy of the end of Rome, attributed to the Sibyl. Among the many legends that shroud the history of ancient Rome, a special place is occupied by the dark prophecy of its end, attributed to the Sibyl, a mysterious priestess whose words were considered for centuries to be the voice of the gods themselves. Her prophecies, contained in the famous Sibylline books, served as a kind of compass for the Romans, which they turned to in times of greatest trial. But alongside these instructions on how to avoid disaster, there was another, far more disturbing legend, that the Sibyl herself predicted not only the greatness of Rome, but also its inevitable fall. According to ancient sources, this prophecy sounded like a chain of images and symbols. It mentioned rivers of blood flowing along marble streets, and walls crumbling to dust under the weight of barbarian assaults. The Sibyl spoke of a time when the descendants of the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus would forget the covenants of their ancestors, and then the land itself would turn away from the city. The fields would become barren, and the waters of the Tiber would turn into a stream of stench and disease. Some commentators have claimed that the Sibyl's words even mention specific signs of the end. Among them were fire engulfing the temples and an eclipse obscuring the sun on the day the enemy would storm the capital. According to legend, she also pointed to the internal cause of Rome's demise. It would not be barbarians who would destroy Rome, but the greed, pride, and betrayal of its own citizens, who would lose faith in the gods and replace it with a thirst for power and gold. Over the centuries, each new disaster was perceived as the fulfillment of these words. When the city was engulfed in fire, when enemies approached its walls, when the plague ravaged the streets, the people remembered the Sibyl and her prophecy. Even the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century was linked by many chroniclers to the priestess's prophetic vision, believing that the fulfillment of the ancient oath had befallen a state that had ignored the signs for too long. Of particular concern was the destruction of the Sibylline books. At first, attempts were made to protect them as a great treasure, but fire and barbarian raids led to their irretrievable disappearance. For the Romans, this symbolized that the gods themselves had turned their backs on their city and no longer wished to guide its fate. In the absence of these texts, legends of the prophecy of the end gained even greater power, for no one could now verify where truth ended and fiction began. Even today, this prophecy is seen as a reflection of an eternal truth. No empire lasts forever, and its fall reflects not only the strength of external enemies, but also the weakness of the inner spirit. For posterity, the Sibyl has become a symbol of the inevitability of fate, which, like a shadow, always accompanies greatness. And so the prophecy of Rome's end continues to sound as a warning that any power, no matter how strong its walls and laws may seem, collapses when the people forget their roots and allow pride to replace their faith. This is the mystique of the Sibyl's words, which have survived millennia and still haunt those who seek answers in ancient mysteries. The death of Emperor Trajan, legends of poison and betrayal. Emperor Trajan went down in history as one of Rome's greatest rulers. His reign was marked by the expansion of its borders to their maximum extent, the flourishing of its cities, and the glory of an invincible commander. Of his life was shrouded in mysteries and rumors that cast a shadow on the image of the great conqueror. What should have been a dignified departure for the emperor after brilliant victories turned into a dark tale, full of suspicions of betrayal, poison, and secret intrigue. Official chronicles claim that Trajan died in the village of Selinunte in Cilicia while returning to Rome after the Eastern campaign. His health was said to have been undermined by age and the strain of battle. But rumors soon surfaced that the emperor's death was not natural. Romans whispered that someone had orchestrated it. It came at an all-too-timely time, paving the way for his successor, Hadrian, to ascend to power. Particular suspicion fell on Plotina, Trajan's wife, who was at his side in his final hours. Sources say that it was she who announced the emperor's death and allegedly forged his will in order to transfer power to Hadrian. Legends claim that Plotina could have played a much more active role. Some spoke of a cup of wine laced with poison, others of a secret medicine that turned into a deadly drink. The court physicians were no less suspect. In Roman tradition, medicine and poison often coexisted, and the physician's art could be used not only for healing but also for elimination. Trajan was believed to have trusted his entourage, but this very trust became his weakness. Intrigue swirled around the throne, and the death of the aging emperor opened new horizons for those who thirsted for power. The mystique was further heightened by the fact that Trajan's body was brought to Rome in a sealed vessel containing his ashes, and no one but his closest confidants witnessed his final moments. The people were unable to verify what exactly had happened in Cilicia, and rumors grew. Some claimed that the emperor cursed the traitors before his death, while others claimed that his spirit appeared to his soldiers in a vision, promising retribution. Historians of later centuries attempted to discover the truth. Some favored a natural illness, while others believed that too many coincidences surrounded the ruler's death to believe it was an accident. But regardless of the facts, legends of poison and betrayal took deep root, transforming Trajan's death into a mystical symbol of the end of an era. Today, the emperor's death is seen as a lesson that even the greatest generals and rulers cannot defend themselves against invisible blows, the intrigues, poisons, and betrayals that lurk close to the throne. And herein lies Rome's true drama. Not only enemies from without threatened its greatness, but also its own shadows, undermining it from within. The mystery of the Basilica of Jupiter Dolicinus and the vanished cult. Among the many cults that flourished in ancient Rome, the cult of Jupiter Dolicinus occupied a special place. Its origins were linked to the eastern lands, the city of Dolicinus in Syria, from where it was transferred to the empire, and quickly won the hearts of legionaries and ordinary citizens. Unlike the traditional image of Jupiter, the lord of thunder in the sky, Jupiter Dolichonus was depicted in a warlike guise, wearing a short oriental chiton, holding an axe in one hand and lightning in the other, standing on the back of a bull. This image inspired fear and simultaneously gave hope that the deity was capable of protecting his followers in battle and granting victory. The cult spread throughout the empire, particularly quickly among soldiers. Altars and shrines to Jupiter Dolichonus were found in camps on the Rhine and Danube, in Britain, and in Africa. His shrines resembled small basilicas, shrouded in secrecy, as rituals were performed only for initiates. One such center was the Basilica of Jupiter Dolichonus, about which only fragmentary information remains. It was believed that special mysteries were held there, during which priests invoked not only thunder and lightning, but also the powers of the earth, combining the cult of Jupiter with Eastern traditions of worshipping fertility deities. However, at the height of its popularity, the cult disappeared almost without a trace. Its altars were destroyed, its statues were smashed, and records of rituals disappeared from chronicles. Archaeologists still find traces of cult buildings, but there is no clear explanation for why such a revered god was rejected. Some believe the cult's decline was linked to the spread of Christianity, which saw it as a dangerous competitor. Others believe its demise occurred even earlier, due to the sudden destruction of the main sanctuary in the east, after which believers decided that God had abandoned them. Many legends have grown up around the Basilica of Jupiter Dolichonus. Rumors circulated that not only statues and altars were kept inside, but also ritual scrolls containing secret knowledge brought from Syria. The priests were said to be able to summon thunderstorms and control the winds, and the sanctuary housed a sacred axe, a symbol of power bestowed by the god himself. When the cult disappeared, these relics disappeared with it. Darker legends also survive. They claim that the worshippers of Jupiter Dolichonus made secret sacrifices not only of animals, but also of people, and that it was these bloody rites that became the cause of persecution. Christian chroniclers wrote that during the fall of the empire, they saw strange lightning strikes striking the ruins of the basilica, as if God himself were punishing the traitors who had rejected his cult. Today, archaeologists find only fragments of temples and statues, fragments of lightning bolts carved into stone slabs and images of a warrior standing on a bull. But the mystery of the cult's disappearance remains unsolved. Why did the god, worshipped by legions across the empire, vanish so suddenly? Was it the result of political decisions, religious reforms, or the prophecies themselves, which the priests concealed from the people? The Basilica of Jupiter Dolichonus still holds this mystery. For historians, it remains a reminder of how quickly powerful beliefs can be erased, and for lovers of mysticism, it is a symbol of forgotten power, hidden in the ruins and shadows of the past, waiting for its moment to reassert itself. The myth of Romulus, who disappeared during a thunderstorm and became a god. Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome, was shrouded in mystery from the very beginning. His story began with a miraculous rescue on the banks of the Tiber, where he and his brother Remus were nursed by a she-wolf, and ended no less mysteriously, with his disappearance during a thunderstorm, which many perceived not as death, but as his transformation into a deity. This myth, preserved in the works of Livy, Plutarch, and other ancient authors, became not only part of the Roman religious tradition, but also a symbol of the mystical origin of the empire itself. According to legend, after founding the city and reigning for many years, Romulus conducted state affairs with his usual determination and severity. He strengthened the army, established laws, expanded Rome's power, laying the foundations of a future empire. But envy also grew. The senators, whom he had repeatedly humiliated with his harshness, whispered that Romulus's rule was becoming a tyranny. Tensions were rising in the city, and, as often happened in Roman history, political jealousy became intertwined with mystical signs of fate. The event that became the culmination of his life occurred on the day of the assembly on the Campus Martius. Romulus was supposed to address the people and senators, but the sky suddenly darkened, and a violent thunderstorm broke out over the city. Thunder rumbled so loudly that people could barely hear each other, and lightning cut through the air, illuminating the crowd. At that moment, according to eyewitnesses, Romulus seemed to vanish into the storm. No one saw him again. When the storm subsided, only stunned senators and the people remained on the field, wondering what had happened. There are several versions of this mystery. The first, the most exalted, claimed that Romulus was raised to heaven by the gods. For the Romans, this was confirmation of his divine origin. The founder of the city, the child of a she-wolf, and the chosen one of fate, could not die as a mere man. His disappearance during a thunderstorm was interpreted as a sign that Jupiter had accepted him into the ranks of the gods, and he henceforth became the patron of Rome under the name Quirinus. A temple was erected in his honor, and the cult of Quirinal reinforced the idea that the city had not only a human but also a heavenly foundation. However, there was another, far more sinister version. Spread by disgruntled senators, it held that Romulus had not ascended at all, but had been murdered. Allegedly, during a thunderstorm, conspirators attacked him, tore his body apart, and secretly removed the remains to cover up the crime. The thunderstorm and the chaos of the crowd helped them conceal the murder. In this legend, Romulus's disappearance was perceived not as a divine miracle, but as the result of human envy and betrayal. To silence rumors of a conspiracy, the senators soon announced to the people that Romulus had not died, but had become a god. They claimed to have seen him ascend into the heavens amidst lightning, and to have appeared to certain of his confidants, promising to protect Rome if the people would uphold his laws and honor his memory. This story became a tradition, and gradually the grim version of the massacre was supplanted by the official myth of divine ascension. Nevertheless, even centuries later, the Romans viewed this story with ambivalent feelings. On the one hand, they revered Romulus the Quirinal, offering prayers to him and seeing him as the city's heavenly protector. On the other hand, there always remained the doubt that behind the myth lay mere human cruelty, and that the founder's disappearance was not a gift from the gods, but the work of men. This contradiction made the story even more mystical, for it was precisely here that the paradox of Rome lay, a city founded on blood, yet elevated to legend as the child of fate. For the Romans, the thunderstorm during which Romulus disappeared had special significance. In their view, lightning bolts were direct manifestations of Jupiter's will. The fact that the disappearance occurred at such a moment could not be dismissed as a coincidence. Many believed that nature itself played a role in Romulus's ascension, concealing him from the eyes of the crowd and performing a miracle that became a symbol of Rome's eternity. Archaeologists and historians still debate the true basis of this myth. Perhaps the senators did kill Romulus, but realizing the people would not accept such a truth, they transformed his death into a legend of divine ascension. Perhaps the people themselves, shocked by the sudden death of their ruler, imbued this event with sacred significance. But whatever actually happened, the legend of Romulus preserved his status not simply as a king, but as a being standing between men and gods. The greatness of this myth lies in the fact that it created a special model for Rome. Every emperor, every general understood that his power and glory would be judged not only in life, but also by how the people perceived his death. The story of Romulus set an example that death could become a mystical transition, an act of transformation into a divine figure. Thus, Romulus's disappearance during a thunderstorm became a symbol of Rome's inseparable connection with the heavens. It was a story about how the city, built by man, stands under the protection of the gods, and its founder forever remained between the worlds to oversee the fate of his creation. For the Romans, this was not just a legend, but proof that Rome was destined to be eternal because its founder himself became eternal. Even today, this myth continues to capture the imagination. It reminds us that the origins of great empires are almost always shrouded in mysticism, and that the boundary between history and myth can disappear, as Romulus vanished in a storm, leaving behind only the legend of a man who became a god. Who? The figure of the witch Canidia in the poetry of Horace and the real stories of Roman witches. Horace's poetry is particularly marked by the sinister image of the witch Canidia, whose name became a symbol of dark magic and witchcraft in ancient Rome. In his satires and epidae, the poet describes her as an old woman with a withered face, tangled hair, and a look of madness. Surrounded by fearsome assistants, Canidia brewed potions from herbs, roots, and blood, used the bones of dead infants, and summoned night demons to sate her thirst for revenge and passion. She appears as the embodiment of fear, of secret feminine powers that transcended the familiar world of Roman gods and laws. Horace portrayed her terrifyingly, but also with a hint of mockery, as if Canidia's witchcraft were not only a real threat, but also the subject of satirical condemnation. However, behind the literary image lurked a reality. Rome did indeed know stories of witches who evoked no less horror in the people than mythical heroines. Women accused of witchcraft were a regular occurrence in Roman history. They were suspected of concocting love potions, poisoning enemies, causing illness, and even death. One of the most famous cases was the so-called Affair of the Poisoners in the 3rd century BC, when dozens of women were accused of preparing poisons and put on trial. For the Romans, the connection between magic and poisoning was obvious. Potions and spells were considered part of the same art, the ability to covertly influence the fate of people. Horatius' Canidia reflected this fear in many ways. In his poems, she collected poisonous herbs from cemeteries, summoned the shades of the dead, and stole bones and hair to imbue her spells with the power of death. These details were not the poet's invention, but a reference to real practices known and feared by the Romans. It was believed that witches gathered plants at night at crossroads, on the border between the worlds of the living and the dead, and that their rituals were accompanied by chants addressed to chthonic deities, Hecate, Proserpina, and Menes. Roman society perceived magic in 2 ways. On the one hand, official priests and oracles were recognized as bearers of sacred knowledge, and their rituals were considered legitimate. On the other hand, secret female magic, hidden from the gaze of the state and men, evoked disgust and panic. Canidia personified precisely this frightening world. She symbolized a woman who had broken free from the traditional confines of family and morality, becoming a keeper of forbidden knowledge and destructive forces. Historical chronicles also mention sorcerers and witches expelled from the city for necromancy or forbidden practices. But despite the punishments, magic remained a part of everyday life. Love spells, amulets, spells against illness or enemies, all remained part of Roman culture. People approached witches secretly, even if they were publicly condemned. Thus, the image of Canidia became a collective one for the Romans. She was both a satirical character of Horace and a reflection of the real fear of women who possessed secret knowledge. This fear lay not only in the possibility of poisoning or illness, but also in the very idea that someone could interfere with fate and change it contrary to the will of the gods and the law. Horace's poetry preserved Canidia as a symbol of sinister female witchcraft, but in her shadow, we can discern the real stories of Roman sorceresses whose secret rituals stirred the imagination of their contemporaries. And in this combination of literature and reality, Roman mysticism emerges with particular clarity. The fear of invisible forces that could not be subdued by either authority or reason. The mystery of the Roman keys to the underground catacombs. The underground catacombs of Rome have always been a source of mysticism and anxiety. These endless corridors, extending deep underground, serve not only as burial sites, but also as a secret refuge for the first Christians, a refuge during times of persecution, and a space where rituals were performed in absolute darkness, lit only by torches. But among all the legends associated with the catacombs, the mystery of the so-called Roman keys stands out in particular. Metal objects found by archaeologists in different parts of the underground passages, the origin and purpose of which still remains unclear. These keys, shaped like something between simple locking devices and symbolic signs, did not always fit the doors or locks known in the catacombs. Many of them were decorated with strange symbols, unlike the usual ornamentation of Rome. Some were found carved with animal figures, snakes, owls, crows, associated in Roman culture with the underworld and magic. Others were marked with symbols resembling Greek letters, but arranged in a chaotic manner, making them look more like a cipher than an inscription. Historians have proposed several theories. According to one, keys were associated with early Christian communities. It was believed that the owner of such a key could open not only the physical doors of the catacombs, but also gain access to closed ritual chambers where baptisms or community meetings were held. Perhaps the keys served as a symbol of trust. If a person brought one, they would be granted access to the most hidden part of the dungeons. There are also more sinister hypotheses. Some researchers believe the keys may have belonged to secret cults that practiced magical rites underground. This theory is supported by symbols reminiscent of necromantic signs. According to legend, rituals to summon spirits were sometimes performed in the catacombs using the bones of the dead, and the key served as a kind of seal that allowed entry into the world of the dead. In this interpretation, keys were not so much tools as amulets connecting the living with the otherworldly. Archaeologists also note a strange pattern. Keys are most often found in places where catacombs open into narrow and poorly explored tunnels leading deeper to places where there are no traces of regular use. This gave rise to the legend that Rome's underground passages contained a second, unknown network leading to sunken sanctuaries or abandoned pagan temples that were not mentioned in official sources. In this context, keys became a symbol of the path to a forbidden space, where only a select few could enter. Folklore, preserved in medieval tradition, claimed that Roman keys could open the doors of time. According to these stories, if a person found the right passage in the catacombs and used the key on a certain night, they could find themselves in another time or meet the souls of deceased emperors and martyrs. Such stories were considered legends, but the very fact of their existence showed what a strong impression these mysterious finds had on the imagination. Also practical explanations. Perhaps the keys were connected to the security of the catacombs. Some of them actually had doors and bars to restrict access to certain niches. But it remains a mystery why such keys were made so complex and decorated with strange symbols, clearly excessive for a simple lock. Today, Roman keys are kept in museums, and each one raises more questions than answers. They look like ordinary objects, but their symbolism makes us wonder what exactly was hidden in the dungeons of Rome. Whether they were simply a sign of membership in a secret society, a tool for locksmithing, or an amulet allowing passage further, we will never know. The mystery of the Roman catacomb keys remains a reminder that beneath the layers of historical facts, there's always room for mystery. Perhaps they were merely a utilitarian object, or perhaps a piece of knowledge that never reached us. And while archaeologists explore new levels of the underground passages, legends about the keys live on, like shadows of the past, holding secrets that Rome chose to conceal in its eternal darkness. The curse of the Colosseum and the strange deaths of the emperors associated with it. The Colosseum, Rome's greatest amphitheater, was originally conceived as a symbol of the empire's power and eternity. But behind its grandiose appearance lurks a disturbing shadow. Many rulers associated with this structure met strange and painful deaths. In the popular imagination, this gave rise to the legend of a curse that has haunted the Colosseum since its founding. Construction began under Vespasian, a stern and decisive man who dreamed of leaving posterity a monumental symbol of Rome. But it was towards the end of his life that the first rumors of ill omens emerged. Chroniclers wrote of nighttime fires and cracks in the foundation. Vespasian died unexpectedly, according to legend, from a stomach ailment, and the Romans whispered that this was retribution for his building a theater on the site previously dedicated to Nero's house, in a garden considered cursed. His son Titus, who inaugurated the Colosseum with grand games, also died soon afterward under strange circumstances. Contemporaries reported a brief fever, but rumors circulated that his death was caused not by illness, but by the sinister force that accompanied the new arena walls. It was Titus who was credited with the phrase that he felt his life fading away with the breath of the Colosseum. Titus's brother Domitianus, who continued to decorate the amphitheater, met an even more horrific end. He was murdered by his own confidants in his chambers, and his death was perceived as a continuation of a series of misfortunes. People believed that the entire Flavian dynasty, which built the Colosseum, was marked by a curse. But the legends didn't stop with the Flavians. Centuries later, when the arena remained the center of life, emperors who staged particularly bloody spectacles there suffered painful deaths. Commodus, who loved to appear as a gladiator, was strangled in a bathhouse, and many saw this as an echo of punishment for the fact that he had humiliated Rome by turning its sacred arena into a private entertainment venue. Caracalla, who also held bloody games, was killed on the road, stabbed by his own bodyguard. Even later rulers who tried to use the Colosseum to restore its former grandeur ended tragically. Some were poisoned, others betrayed by their closest allies. A popular myth circulated that the spirits of dead gladiators and beasts had cursed the Colosseum. Thousands of deaths, the blood soaking into the arena sand, created an invisible aura. It was believed that anyone who attempted to use the amphitheater for a show of power would sooner or later meet with death. Medieval chronicles further reinforced these stories. Christian authors claimed that the Colosseum stood on the blood of martyrs, and that their souls cursed the place. They wrote that the walls of the arena absorbed the cries of the dying, and now every ruler associated with it became a victim of inevitable retribution. Archaeologists and historians today see a more symbolic meaning in these stories. The Colosseum was not just a building, but a place where cruelty, spectacles of death, and power politics were concentrated. It's no surprise that the fates of emperors closely associated with the arena were tinged with mystical aura. But for the ancient Romans, these coincidences were no coincidence, but proof that the Colosseum had a life of its own and avenged the bloodshed within its walls. The curse of the Colosseum continued to reverberate for centuries. Even after the amphitheater ceased to be a battlefield, its ruins remained a symbol of the empire's demise. People believed that as long as the Colosseum stood, Rome would live. But if it fell, so would the world. This thought conveys not only mystical anxiety, but also the belief that greatness always brings with it a curse. Thus, the curse of the Colosseum became one of the most terrifying legends of ancient Rome. A story about how monuments to power could turn into monuments to death, and the arena of glory could become a trap for those who dared to place their fate near its bloody walls. Mysterious cults of Mithras in the underground Mithraeums of Rome. The cult of Mithras, which came to Rome from the east, was one of the most mysterious and secretive religious traditions of late antiquity. Its secret rites were performed in Mithraeums, underground sanctuaries skillfully carved into the earth or constructed in dark basements. These sanctuaries were cramped and low, reminiscent of caves, where devotees could have a mystical experience, as if they were returning to the mythical grotto in which the god Mithra performed his greatest feat, the killing of the bull, from whose body life on earth arose. Archaeologists find mysterious images in Mithraea. Mithras, wearing a Persian cap, pierces a sacred bull, from whose wound grain and grapes burst forth. Nearby, a scorpion stings the bull in the genitals, and a dog and a snake drink its blood. The symbolism of this scene remains unclear. Some scholars see it as an allegory of fertility and the eternal cycle of nature. Others as an astronomical map, with each animal associated with a constellation. But not a single ancient author left a detailed description of the Mithras mysteries. Everything we know is based on fragments, symbols, and conjecture. Mithraeum rituals were available only to initiated men, most often soldiers and officials. Initiation proceeded in stages, each with a special name: Raven, Hidden, Soldier, Lion, Persian, Heliodromus, Father. With each stage, the participant was believed to gain new knowledge and special responsibilities. However, the secrecy of the rituals was strictly guarded, and initiates never divulged details. It was precisely this silence that made the cult so frightening to outsiders. People believed that rituals were performed in the depths of the Mithraea, in which sacrifice and blood played a key role. Legends about the Mithrists spread throughout Rome. They were said to gather at night, drink the blood of sacrificial bulls, form fraternal alliances sealed with secret oaths, and worship a light emanating from darkness. For the common people, all this sounded like a challenge to the traditional gods, but for the early Christians, the cult of Mithra became a dangerous rival. After all, there too existed the sacrament of the sacred meal, where bread and wine symbolized a divine gift. The underground Mithraea were designed to symbolize the cosmos. A narrow passage led into a long room with stone benches along the walls, where the faithful gathered. In the center stood an altar with an image of Mithras, and in the background was a niche with his relief, illuminated by torches and lamps. The atmosphere was full of mysticism. The smell of sacrificial meat, the smoke of oil, and the subdued lighting created a sense of the presence of the supernatural. What exactly happened during the mysteries remains a mystery. Perhaps the new converts were subjected to trials. They were doused with cold water, forced to walk through darkness, or even witness the execution of an animal. Perhaps astral meditations were conducted, during which the neophyte learned the secret paths of souls after death. But no hypothesis has been definitively confirmed. With the disappearance of pagan cults, Mithraism also faded. Christianity gradually supplanted it, although in some respects the two teachings overlapped. But the memory of the Mithraea remained, and underground halls depicting Mithras and his bull are still found in the ruins of Rome. These places leave a chilling impression even on modern researchers. Narrow spaces, low vaults, symbols whose secrets remain hidden. The cult of Mithras has become one of the greatest mysteries of ancient Rome. We know its symbols, see its underground temples, but we don't understand the essence of its rituals. And it is precisely this mystery that makes it so captivating, as if the depths of the Mithraea still conceal knowledge that was given only to a select few and was never revealed to the world. The mysticism of the Forum of Boaria, sacrificial altars with mysterious inscriptions. The Forum Boreas, Rome's oldest cattle market, was not only a place of trade, but also a space where pagan traditions intersected with mysticism and superstition. Here, at the foot of the Palatine and Aventine hills, the Romans erected altars dedicated to a variety of deities: Hercules, Fortuna, and unknown local spirits. But archaeologists and historians highlight a special phenomenon. On some sacrificial altars, inscriptions and symbols have been discovered that cannot be deciphered unambiguously, which gave rise to legends that the Forum Boari was a place of secret cults and forgotten gods. The surviving stone blocks, dating from the 3rd to the 2nd centuries BC, contain short Latin inscriptions executed in an unusual manner. Some words are composed of distorted letters, while others are cut off mid-text, as if the rest of the text were known only to initiates. The researchers were particularly drawn to formulas reminiscent of spells. They repeat names, intermingled with obscure symbols resembling magical sigils. On one of the altars, the word semita, path, way, appears. But nearby is a sign resembling an intertwining of snakes, which in Roman tradition indicated the transition between worlds. Legends say these altars were erected not by ordinary priests, but by the servants of mysterious cults who used the Forum Boari as a crossroads for their rituals. Not only animals were sacrificed here, but also perhaps symbolic offerings, figurines, amulets, and vessels of blood. According to legend, such rituals opened the way to underground powers that could grant wealth, success in trade, or protection from disease. Some researchers believe the mysterious inscriptions are linked to Greek or Etruscan influence. After all, Rome absorbed the cultures of its neighbors in its early period, and the altars could have reflected traces of forgotten languages or secret religious traditions. But the mystery lies in the fact that such inscriptions are found only in the Forum Boaria, and almost nowhere else in the city, making it a unique space of mysticism. Among the Romans, there was a belief that the Forum Boari stood on the site where Hercules defeated a monstrous bull, or, according to another version, the fire-breathing Cacus. Altars with mysterious signs were associated with this myth, believing that the passage to the world of heroes and spirits was preserved here. It was said that at night, reflections of blue flames could be seen above the altars, a sign that the sacrifices were accepted not by people, but by the forces of another world. Medieval chroniclers, seeing dilapidated altars, claimed they were stone books left by ancient magicians. They believed these symbols opened the gates to knowledge of the stars and the destinies of people. Even during the Renaissance, the Forum Boari was considered a place where ancient forces resided. Alchemists and mystics searched for stones and fragments with inscriptions there, believing that they contained formulas of power. Today, the mystery of the sacrificial altars remains unsolved. Scholars continue to debate whether these symbols are merely fragments of formulas that have lost their meaning, or whether they truly held a secret accessible only to a select few. But the very fact that so many unusual symbols are concentrated in the Forum Boaria, a place of trade and cattle, suggests that the Romans perceived it not simply as a marketplace, but as a sacred crossroads where the human world met the world of gods and spirits. The mysticism of the Forum Boaria remains part of that dark side of Rome, where secret rituals and fears coexisted alongside the grandeur of the empire. Altars with inscriptions whose meaning we can no longer understand remind us that the ancient Romans knew how to leave messages not only for posterity but also for the powers they simultaneously revered and feared. Ghost stories of the Roman baths. Roman baths were not only a place of relaxation, purification, and socialization, but also a space where, according to contemporaries, strange and disturbing phenomena occurred. Their complex architecture, filled with steam, echoes, and the subdued light of torches, created an atmosphere where the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead seemed shaky. This is why the history of Rome is full of stories about ghosts supposedly inhabiting the baths, turning these symbols of civilization into hotbeds of mysticism and fear. The most famous legends were about the Baths of Caracalla. This huge complex, which could accommodate thousands of people, was considered a magnificent piece of architecture and engineering. But it was there, according to legend, that people saw figures in white tuggle robes appearing among clouds of steam. Some claimed that these were the souls of slaves who died during construction. Others said that they were the spirits of the victims of the Emperor Caracalla, whose cruelty became the talk of the town. It was even written that Caracalla himself appeared in his baths after his death. His shadow wandered the corridors, sometimes appearing in the mosaic halls, reflected in the water, as if in a mirror. No less grim stories concerned the baths of Trajan. There was a story of a woman drowning in the Frigidarium pool. Her silhouette, according to eyewitnesses, rose from the water at night when the baths were already empty. People believed her death was no accident. Supposedly she was sacrificed by a group of secret priests who used the baths' waters as a ritual site. Even private baths located in wealthy homes had their own scary stories. One popular tale involved the apparition of a ghost in the baths of a wealthy senator, where servants heard footsteps and screams at night, even though the premises were empty. Later, it was said that this was the spirit of a gladiator killed by the owner of the house in a quarrel, and his body was hidden under the bath floor. The Romans held a special belief that steam and water themselves could act as conductors of spirits. When a person entered the thick mist of a steam room, it was as if they were crossing the boundary between worlds, and it is therefore not surprising that visions became part of the experience. The dense steam and the play of torchlight created images that many mistook for the presence of the dead. Late Christian writers reinforced this image, calling bathhouses dens of demons. They claimed that it was there that demons deceived people by taking the form of the dead, and that victims of luxury and debauchery remained bound to these places even after death. Archaeologists studying the ruins of the baths found strange evidence: amulets, spells scratched on the walls, small figurines hidden in crevices. All this confirms that the Romans themselves perceived the baths as a place where they needed protection from evil spirits. Legends of ghosts in Roman baths have survived to this day as a reminder that even in the heart of civilization, amid marble and splendor, people saw shadows, feared the invisible, and felt the breath of death. Baths, a place of life and purification, easily transformed in their imaginations into gateways to the world of the dead, where steam and water became a shelter for those who never left Rome. Ominous signs, eclipses, and meteors that accompanied the fall of the empire. The ancient Romans lived in a world where celestial phenomena were not perceived as mere natural phenomena. Every solar or lunar disk hidden in shadow, every fiery streak cutting across the night sky, were understood as messages from the gods. The more turbulent the times, the more often they sought warnings and prophecies in these signs. The fall of the Roman Empire was accompanied by a series of celestial signs which were written about by chroniclers, and each of them was considered a symbol of impending disaster. Solar eclipses had a special effect on the Romans. Imagine a city plunged into the darkness of day, the screams of people, the barking of dogs, the fall of birds. Chronicles report that before the death of Julius Caesar, an eclipse was observed in Rome, and many said it foreshadowed a bloody denouement in the Senate. Later, during the time of Emperor Augustus, the moon's shadow again obscured the sun, and the people saw this as a sign that the greatness of the young state would not last forever. But celestial phenomena were especially often associated with the late era, when the empire was already bursting at the seams. In the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, chroniclers recorded a series of eclipses, each of which was perceived as a warning. When wars broke out on the borders and unrest arose in the heart of Rome, people looked up and saw darkness in broad daylight. For them, this was not a coincidence, but the seal of fate. Meteors and fire stars were no less significant. The Romans believed that the fall of celestial bodies signified the death of great people or the collapse of entire states. In 410, when Alaric's Visigoths approached the city walls, a flaming trail was seen in the sky, like a spear piercing the darkness. This event was recorded as a sign of the fall of the Eternal City. And shortly before the final collapse of the Western Empire in 476, chroniclers wrote of rains of fire, as if the heavens themselves were bringing a curse upon the earth. Popular interpretations were filled with horror. Some claimed that the gods had turned away from Rome and were sending darkness to signal the end. Others saw it as retribution for the blood of Christians spilled in the arenas. Astrologers, however, found confirmation of their predictions in eclipses and meteors. They calculated the fates of emperors and wrote that each new fiery sign in the sky foretells the death of the ruler. Christian authors of the later era further reinforced this image. For them, celestial signs were not a play of the gods, but a manifestation of the will of the one God, punishing proud Rome. They claimed that darkness during the day and falling stars were biblical symbols of the end times, and that the fall of the empire was only the beginning of far more terrible events. Today, scientists can explain these phenomena by natural causes. Eclipses can be calculated retroactively, and meteor showers are associated with the Earth's passage through the tails of comets. But for the ancients, this knowledge was inaccessible. Every time the sky darkened or a flame flared above the horizon, they felt the touch of fate. That's why the fall of Rome, in the minds of the people of that time, wasn't simply a historical process. It seemed like the fulfillment of a prophecy, foreshadowed by the heavens themselves. Ominous eclipses and meteors became a symbol of how even the greatest empire couldn't resist the fate written in the stars. The mystery of Roman sarcophagi with images of other worlds. The sarcophagi of Rome, created for noble citizens and emperors, have long been the subject of study by archaeologists and art historians. Most are decorated with mythological scenes, the abduction of Persephone, the labors of Hercules, and the battles of heroes. But among the many such monuments, there are special sarcophagi whose reliefs depict scenes that cannot be clearly linked to classical mythology. They show strange spaces, figures, and symbols, which many researchers call images of other worlds, mysterious afterlife realities hidden beyond human understanding. One of the most striking examples is a sarcophagus from Rome, which is carved with a scene of a staircase ascending into the heavens, surrounded by stars and shining figures. A cloaked man ascends the steps, and at the bottom he is met by creatures with wings and strange headdresses. Scholars debate whether this depicts the soul's journey to the world of immortals, or a secret ritual of initiates. The difficulty is that there are no direct analogies to such a composition in ancient mythology. Other sarcophagi depict scenes in which the world of the living seems to dissolve into another dimension. One depicts city walls, beyond which an ocean opens up, with monsters reminiscent not of Greek centaurs or sirens, but of fantastical creatures with wings and eyes on their bodies. Sometimes, enigmatic geometric symbols, circles, triangles, intertwining lines, are placed nearby. All of this resembles an esoteric language rather than a familiar, decorative tradition. It is hypothesized that such images are associated with Eastern cults, particularly Mithraism and Neoplatonism. These teachings placed great emphasis on the soul's journey after death, and envisioned different levels of the universe that must be traversed to reach the light. Perhaps Roman artists attempted to express such ideas in stone, creating scenes that were understandable only to initiates. At the same time, ordinary Romans saw something unsettling in these reliefs. Chroniclers wrote that people were afraid to stop at night near some sarcophagi. It seemed as if the figures came to life, and the staircases and gates in the stone transformed into real passages. Legends existed that the souls buried in such sarcophagi found no peace and emerged from them on special days of the year, when the boundary between worlds became thin. Medieval monks who found these sarcophagi in ruins called them demon stones. For them, the mysterious images were proof that pagans worshipped dark forces. But some Renaissance alchemists and mystics saw in these scenes codes left by ancient oracles. They claimed that the drawings on the sarcophagi contained secret knowledge about the structure of the universe and the soul's passage through the stellar spheres. Today, archaeology confirms that some of these images do not have direct mythological parallels. Sarcophagi with staircases, gates, and cosmic symbols remain rare, but they are the ones that make the strongest impression on researchers. They seem to conceal the Romans' fear of the unknown, and at the same time, their hope that death is not the end, but the beginning of a journey into worlds inaccessible to the living. The mystery of Roman sarcophagi depicting other worlds remains unsolved. Whether they were expressions of secret cults, philosophical teachings, or the personal visions of their masters, we will never know. But each such sarcophagus reminds us that even in a civilization that prided itself on its rationalism and practicality, there was always room for mysticism, where stone became a portal to the unknown. Mysterious cults of Saturn and his bloody holidays. The cult of Saturn was one of the most ancient and mysterious in Rome, inherited from the archaic traditions of the Latins and Etruscans. Saturn was considered the god of time, harvest, and abundance, but his image always had a dark side. Unlike Jupiter or Mars, which personified strength and power, Saturn was associated with the cycle of birth and death, with the inevitable destruction that follows wealth. His temple on the Capitol was not only a place of worship, but also a kind of treasury for Rome, which gave the cult even more sacred significance. The most famous festival in honor of Saturn was Saturnalia, which began on December the 17th and lasted several days. Outwardly, it was perceived as a joyful time of freedom and upheaval. Slaves and masters traded places, people held feasts, gave each other candles and figurines, and filled the city with laughter and noise. But behind this outward joy lay a much darker foundation, dating back to ancient times. Ancient authors wrote that the cult of Saturn initially involved human sacrifice. Pliny the Elder and Macrobius mentioned that in ancient times, people were sacrificed at his festivals to appease the god, who was associated with the bloody cycles of time and fertility. Later, the people were replaced with wax figurines, sigillaria, but the memory of real victims lived on in legends and inspired horror. Particularly alarming was the tradition of reversing social roles. A slave could sit at his master's table while the master served him. And although this only happened for a few days, in the eyes of the Romans, it seemed like a dangerous game with the very fabric of the world order. People believed that during Saturnalia, the boundaries between worlds became fluid. The spirits of the dead could return, and Saturn himself, associated with the underworld, emerged from his prison to wander the city. Some chroniclers claim that strange events occurred during these days. People saw shadows in alleys, heard the voices of the dead in houses, and found symbols scratched into the streets, as if signs from those who did not belong to the world of the living. Saturn was perceived as a god devouring his children, and the Romans believed that if he was not appeased, he could devour Rome itself. Christian writers later demonized this cult even further, claiming that Saturnalia was a time of the devil's power, when people rejected divine order and gave themselves over to chaos. They saw this tradition not as a celebration of the harvest, but as a bloody ritual commemorating a demon whom the Romans elevated to the rank of a deity. Today, historians continue to debate the true depth of these rituals, but archaeological finds, in particular, altars depicting Saturn with a sickle and sacrificial symbols, confirm that this god was perceived not as a benevolent guardian of the harvest, but as a dark and terrifying force demanding sacrifice. His cult was simultaneously a celebration of freedom and a ritual commemorating death, a reminder that behind every joy lies a shadow, and behind every harvest lies blood. The mysterious cults of Saturn and his bloody festivals remain among the most sinister testaments to how deep in the heart of Rome lay the belief in cycles of destruction and rebirth. Even in the era of the empire's splendor, the Romans could not forget that the god of time always stood over them, to whom sooner or later they would have to repay their debt. About the Lemurian Rite, how the Romans tried to expel evil spirits. Among the many ancient Roman holidays, Lemuria, a mystical rite dedicated to the exorcism of the evil spirits of the dead, occupied a special place. While Saturnalia was a time of upheaval and revelry, Lemuria, celebrated in May, was filled with fear and anxiety. It was believed that it was on these days that the souls of the restless dead, called lemurs, returned to the world of the living to wander the streets, enter houses, and take revenge on those who had offended them during their lifetime, or did not show them proper funeral honors. The main character in the ritual was the head of the family, who was responsible for protecting the house from the invasion of ghosts. At night, he walked barefoot around the house, performing rituals that were supposed to close the path to evil spirits. The most famous and strange element of the ritual was the use of beans. The owner would take 9 black beans and throw them over his shoulder, chanting a spell promising that these beans would take the souls of the dead. The Romans believed that spirits would willingly follow the beans, perceiving them as a sacrifice, and leave the house. After this, the owner would strike a bronze vessel or pot, creating a booming sound intended to scare away the most stubborn ghosts. Some sources mention that words of exorcism were uttered, something like the formula, "Away, spirits of ancestors, go away." The household members were to remain silent during this time, so as not to attract the attention of those who had not yet departed. Interestingly, even the origin of the ritual's name was linked to spirits. Lemurs and larvae were not simply the souls of the dead, but dangerous, vengeful entities. Unlike the benevolent lairs, protectors of the family, lemurs were considered sinister and restless. They could bring illness, cause fires, or send bad dreams. Therefore, Lemuria was not a holiday, but a necessary means of survival, a kind of nighttime battle with invisible enemies. Christian authors later condemned this ritual, calling it demonic. They claimed that the Romans were actually communicating with the spirits of hell. However, the very fact that the ritual was preserved for centuries speaks to its deep roots in Roman culture. People believed that if they neglected Lemuria, misfortune would not be long in coming. Modern researchers see in this holiday ancient magical purification practices dating back to the Italic tribes. Black beans symbolize both death and fertility. The noise represented the expulsion of chaos, and the nighttime ritual was a way to restore order to the home and family. Today, the Lemurian Rite remains one of the most enigmatic chapters of Roman religious life. It demonstrates that even in an empire with majestic temples and philosophical schools, there existed a world of everyday mysticism, where ordinary people battled invisible fears with beans, bronze vessels, and whispered incantations. It was a reminder that Rome lived not only by laws and armies, but also by the fear of the dead, whose footsteps might resound in the silence of the night. The death of Pompey, legends about the priests who predicted the catastrophe. The tragedy of Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 AD was one of the most horrific catastrophes of antiquity. The sudden eruption of Vesuvius buried the cities in ash, leaving behind streets, houses, and the bodies of their inhabitants frozen in time. But along with archaeological finds, legends have also come down to us, according to which Pompeii's destruction was not unexpected. Priests and soothsayers allegedly warned of the impending end, but their words went unheeded. Ancient authors report that long before the catastrophe, local residents observed strange signs. The waters of the springs became bitter, animals abandoned their pastures, and red reflections, resembling a glow, appeared over the summit of Vesuvius. In some temples, there is evidence of priests making unusual sacrifices to the gods of the underworld, attempting to appease the forces awakening in the mountains. According to legend, they warned that the earth would open up and swallow all life, but most townspeople dismissed their words as mere dramatic imagery. Anna, the city's patroness, plays a special role in the legends. It was believed that priestesses of Venus, several months before the catastrophe, fell into a trance and spoke of a white cloud turning black and day turning to night. These prophetic utterances were interpreted in various ways. Some saw them as a metaphor, others as a threat of war. But later, when a deadly column of ash and gas loomed over the city, the priestess's words were frighteningly confirmed. Another legend tells of a priest of Apollo who supposedly predicted the city's demise by observing the behavior of birds. He noticed that flocks had abandoned their usual nests and disappeared toward the sea. In Rome, such phenomena were considered a sure omen of disaster. But the residents of Pompeii, accustomed to minor earthquakes, paid no attention to this. When the eruption began, the priests, according to some chroniclers, attempted to perform ceremonies of appeasement, but fire and smoke destroyed their altars. People saw this as a sign that the gods had turned away, and the earth itself had risen against the city. There is even a legend that one of the priests was found frozen at the entrance to the temple. He had not left his place, and died holding a vessel of sacrificial blood. Over time, these stories became intertwined with Christian interpretations. Christian authors claimed that the eruption was punishment for the depravity and idleness of the Pompeian inhabitants. For them, the priests and their prophecies merely confirmed this. The heavens warned of punishment, but the people did not heed. Today, science explains the catastrophe as a natural result of geological processes. But legends about priests who saw signs of the gods' wrath in the smoke and earth live on. They reflect the ancients' fear of the forces of nature, which they saw not simply as elements, but as the will of higher powers. The destruction of Pompeii remains a reminder that even the greatest civilization is powerless against mountains and fire. And if legends are to be believed, there were warnings, but people chose not to listen, and the city vanished, leaving behind only silent stone streets and a history in which the prophecies came true all too literally. The mystery of the disappearance of the 9th Legion in Britain. The 9th Legion was one of the most renowned Roman military units. Its history stretched back to the time of Julius Caesar, and it fought in Spain, Gaul, and against the Germans. But the Legion is most remembered for its mysterious death in Britain. According to sources, around the beginning of the 2nd century, the Legion, which numbered thousands of experienced warriors, disappeared, leaving no trace except rumors and legends. The Legion is still mentioned in official documents from the last decades of the 1st century. Its soldiers were stationed as a garrison in the fortress of Eboracum, modern York. But by 120, references to the 9th disappear from all Roman lists. Modern historians debate whether it was destroyed in battle, disbanded, or secretly transferred to another part of the empire. However, it is the version of its complete annihilation in Britain that has given rise to many grim stories. Legends say the 9th Legion was sent north to pacify the rebellious Pictish and Briton tribes. The soldiers moved deep into the misty lands where swamps and forests hid their enemies. According to one version, the Legion fell into a carefully prepared ambush. Thousands of soldiers were surrounded, and none returned to tell the tale of Roman discipline meeting the fury of the local tribes. Other stories say a fog descended upon the detachment, and the soldiers simply vanished, as if swallowed by the earth itself. And legends connected with this mystery still exist. Villagers said that during the full moon, the sound of invisible soldiers marching in formation across the marshes could be heard. Children frightened each other with stories of the Ninth Legion having departed for another world, and its ghosts still wandering the cold hills. For the Celtic tribes, the disappearance of the Romans was proof that their land was protected by the spirits of their ancestors and the gods of war. Archaeologists searched for traces of the battle, burials, weapons, or the remains of a camp, but no convincing evidence of the legion's complete annihilation was ever found. This further heightened the aura of mysticism. If thousands of soldiers perished, why were no mass burials found? If the legion was transferred to another region, why did its insignia and inscriptions disappear? Roman historians also left no clear answer. Tacitus and Cassius Dione mentioned the unrest in Britain, but remained silent about the fate of the Ninth. This silence seems suspicious, as if someone was deliberately concealing the catastrophe so as not to undermine faith in Rome's invincibility. In an empire where the honor of a legion was a symbol of power, the disappearance of an entire unit could be perceived as a disgrace. Today, researchers are inclined to believe that the legion was indeed defeated in Britain, although this version has not been definitively confirmed. But for the people of that time, surrounded by mysticism and belief in omens, the disappearance of the Ninth became a symbol of the wrath of the gods and the power of a wild island unconquered even by Rome. The mystery of the Ninth Legion lives on in legends, books, and films. It is a story of how even the most disciplined army can vanish into the mists of a foreign land, leaving behind only silence and whispers, the footsteps of warriors never seen again. The accursed legions that disappeared in the highlands of Scotland. Roman Britain always remained a difficult and rebellious frontier for the empire, where the harsh climate, unruly tribes, and unfamiliar landscapes made every campaign a trial. Particularly terrifying for the Romans were the lands north of the later-built Hadrian's Wall, the mountains and valleys of Scotland inhabited by Celtic and Pictish tribes. It was there, according to legends and tales, that entire units of Roman legions disappeared. And to this day, these stories are shrouded in mystery and obscurity. Chronicles mention that several detachments were sent deep into the mountainous regions to pacify the tribes. However, unlike their campaigns in Gaul or Germany, the Romans here encountered not only fierce resistance but also mysterious disappearances. Warriors reported thick fogs that would suddenly descend on the gorges and seem to break ranks. When the fog cleared, individual cohorts could vanish without a trace. No one found bodies, weapons, or camps, only silence and traces of fires burning out without their owners. According to one legend, these lands belonged to the ancient gods of war, to whom local priests offered bloody sacrifices. When the Romans dared to disturb sacred burial mounds or destroy sanctuaries, their troops were cursed, and they ceased to return. Ancient Pictish tales claim that the mountain spirits themselves rose up against the foreigners. The earth shook beneath their feet, rivers overflowed their banks, and warriors were drawn into darkness by an unknown force. Stories survive of a campaign in which 1,000 soldiers allegedly entered a ravine and were never seen again. The few survivors were said to return to camp distraught, empty-eyed, claiming to have seen enormous shadows surrounding the legion in the mountains. Their speeches sounded like delirium, and their fate is shrouded in the same mystery as the disappearance of their comrades. Roman commanders tried to conceal such stories so as not to undermine the army's morale. However, rumors spread faster than orders. Among the soldiers, there was a widespread belief that the northern lands were cursed, and that the gods of Britain took vengeance on anyone who stepped too far. Many refused to believe that these were only military defeats. The disappearances seemed too strange to be explained by ambushes or uprisings. Archaeologists and historians have attempted to confirm the legends, but excavations in Scotland have so far yielded no answers. Stone forts and Hadrian's Wall serve as reminders of Rome's attempts to halt its advance north. And the silence of chronicles only reinforces the feeling that some details were deliberately concealed. For the Romans, the vanished legions became a symbol of the futility of their conquests in these lands. It was after these events that the empire abandoned its plans for the complete conquest of the north and focused on strengthening its borders. And for the local tribes, this story became proof that even mighty Rome was powerless against the spirits of their mountains and the strength of their ancestors. Today, the myth of the cursed legions lives on in British folklore. In misty valleys, people still say they can hear the footsteps of soldiers at night, the clash of weapons, and the distant sound of trumpets. These are the ghostly echoes of the Roman army that never returned, forever trapped in the Scottish Highlands, and the legends that grew up around their mysterious disappearance. Hoard of cursed coins, sacrificial gifts that brought misfortune to their owners. The ancient Romans regarded coins not only as a means of trade and wealth, but also as sacred symbols that could become a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. In temples, wells, and sacred springs, archaeologists have found entire hoards of coins that were clearly not lost by chance. These gifts to the gods and spirits were meant to appease the higher powers. But over time, legends arose around such finds about cursed coins that brought misfortune to those who dared to take them. One such legend concerns a mysterious treasure discovered among the ruins of a temple in Capua. The coins were believed to have been sacrificed to the underworld gods during a terrible epidemic. People threw silver and bronze into the sacred pit, praying for salvation. However, when, centuries later, peasants discovered this treasure and decided to claim it for themselves, a series of misfortunes began in the village. Livestock suddenly began to die. Houses burned in accidental fires, and those who found it perished one after another. Some from disease, some in strange accidents. Similar stories were found in other regions of the empire. In Britain, a legend tells of a Roman soldier who, while excavating a sanctuary, found a vessel containing coins. He secretly carried off the find, but soon began to have nightmares. He saw dead figures reaching out to him, demanding the return of what he had stolen. His death came quickly and mysteriously. He seemed to suffocate in his sleep. Afterwards, his comrades threw the coins back into the ground, believing they belonged to the gods. It's significant that the Romans themselves feared such curses. Texts contain references to sacrificial offerings being left where they were, as any touching them defiles a person and brings wrath upon them. Curses are found in magical tablets, where the souls of the dead are called upon to guard the offerings and punish thieves. Thus, belief in cursed treasures was part of everyday religious practice. Archaeology confirms that many hoards were indeed hidden not for safety, but as part of a ritual. The coins were found in springs, wells, or buried under altars. Their location precluded the owner's return, making them sacrifices rather than hoards. Modern stories of cursed coins sometimes sound like continuations of ancient legends. Tourists and collectors who find random Roman coins near old temples claim that they were subsequently haunted by illness, bad luck, or frightening dreams. Perhaps these are coincidences, but the very atmosphere of the find and ancient stories of cursed gifts make the imagination work. The mystique of the cursed coin hoard reminds us that in Rome, money could be not only a source of power and prosperity, but also a dangerous connection to the otherworldly. For ancient people, it was not just metal, but a symbol of a pact with the gods, the violation of which entailed retribution. And even after 2,000 years, the idea that such coins could hold someone else's fate compels us to treat them with alarming respect. Strange sacrifices in the Temple of the Vestals and the disappearance of the sacred fire. The Temple of the Vestals in the heart of Rome was considered one of the city's most important sanctuaries, as it housed the sacred fire of the goddess Vesta, guardian of the hearth and the very fate of the empire. 6 Vestal priestesses, dressed in white, ensured that the flame never went out. It was believed that as long as it burned, Rome will stand firm. The dying of the fire was interpreted as a sign of the gods' wrath and a harbinger of disaster. But beyond the official rites, surrounded by solemn sanctity, there were popular legends of strange sacrifices secretly performed in the temple and accompanied by mystical disappearances. According to legend, gifts were sometimes brought to the Temple of the Vestals that were in no way consistent with the traditional cult. Instead of the usual offerings, fruit, bread, or wine, animals were found whose bodies were charred, as if they had been thrown directly into the fire. Ancient authors hinted that such gifts may have been part of secret rituals associated with the invocation of subterranean powers. Some claim that voices and groans were heard in the temple at night, and that the Vestals performed rituals unknown to the common people. A special place in these legends is occupied by the mysterious disappearance of the sacred fire. On rare occasions it did go out, and this was always accompanied by disaster, enemy invasions, epidemics, or the death of emperors. Historians attributed this to chance or the negligence of the priestesses, but the people believed that secret rituals were the cause. According to one story, a Vestal virgin allegedly sacrificed blood by pouring it into the hearth, after which the flame went out and an epidemic swept through the city. In Rome, such rumors were perceived as a terrible insult to the goddess. The Vestal virgins were held in special esteem, but if they were suspected of breaking vows or engaging in secret rituals, the punishment was severe. There were cases of them being buried alive in underground chambers, accused of desecrating the sacred fire. The people believed that such executions not only restored justice, but also restored the favor of the gods. Legends also tell that extinguished fires were not always rekindled by ordinary torches. Sometimes, special rituals were required, lenses that collected sunlight or sacred objects hidden in the temple. This gave the disappearance of the flame an even greater mystical connotation. Archaeological research finds no direct evidence of secret sacrifices, but the very existence of fear of the fire's extinction demonstrates how deeply people believed in the mystical connection between the flame and the fate of the state. Every time it disappeared, the inhabitants of Rome saw it not as an accident, but as a sign from higher powers. Today, the Temple of the Vestals lies in ruins, but the image of the fading fire and strange nocturnal rituals still stirs the imagination. For the Romans, it was a reminder that even the most sacred power could turn into a curse if abused. For us, it is one of those mysteries of antiquity where the line between religion and mysticism remains a blurred and disturbing vestige of the past. About the Racula and the Temple of Apollo in the Cumaean Grottos. The Cumaean Grottos, located near Naples, have been surrounded by an aura of mysticism and fear since ancient times. According to legend, the Cumaean Sibyl, a priestess of Apollo whose prophecies were both revered and feared, lived there in the dark corridors carved into the tuff. It was believed that it was here that the deity of light and truth descended to earth to tell through the lips of a woman about the fates of cities, empires, and individuals. The grottos were long corridors with narrow windows through which rare rays of sunlight filtered through, creating an ominous play of light and shadow. According to ancient authors, the air within these walls was filled with a strange odor and heavy vapors. Believers believed it was the breath of Apollo himself that plunged the priestess into a sacred trance. The Sibyl sat on a stone throne. Her body began to tremble. Her voice became low and hoarse, and then she uttered words which assistants recorded on tablets. The words of the Sibyl were rarely clear. They came in the form of riddles, images, and hints that required interpretation. But it was precisely this vagueness that gave the prophecies special weight. They could be applied to a variety of events, and there were always those who saw in them a sign of fate. Oracles from the Cumaean Grottos predicted wars, the fall of kingdoms, and the death of emperors. One of the most famous legends was that the Sibyl foretold the arrival of Aeneas in Italy and the founding of the future Rome, making the grottos a sacred place for all of Roman history. However, the fame of the Cumaean Sibyl also had a dark side. People believed that those who dared to ask too bold questions could lose their minds or lives. Legends told of warriors who entered the grotto to learn the outcome of a battle and returned blind or mute. Others claimed that some visitors even disappeared into the depths of the dungeons, as if taken by the gods. One of the most disturbing legends was that the Sibyl kept books of prophecy written in her own hand. These scrolls, known as the Sibylline books, supposedly contained secrets to the future of Rome. When one of the kings refused to buy them at the demanded price, the Sibyl burned some of the scrolls, claiming that the remaining ones were still worth the same amount. Only then did he agree, but he was forever left with the feeling that part of his destiny had been lost with the fire. Today, archaeologists are finding evidence of the existence of mysterious galleries and halls where rituals may have actually taken place, but they are unable to explain the phenomenon of prophecies. Perhaps trance states were induced by the poisonous vapors of the earth, and the ambiguous predictions were merely a skillful trick of the priestess. But for the Romans, this was a place where the gods spoke directly, and the darkness of the dungeons held answers to the most terrible questions. The Cumaean Grottos remain a symbol of how closely intertwined faith and fear were in the ancient world. Oracles here sounded not as consolation, but as a test. To hear the truth meant to touch a mystery that could change fate, but never promised peace. Curses written on lead tablets. In the shadow of the majestic temples and forums of ancient Rome, there existed another, darker layer of faith. Faith and curses inscribed on lead tablets called deficciones. These thin sheets of lead, covered in carved letters, held not prayers to the gods, but secret spells filled with malice, pain, and a thirst for revenge. They were buried in the ground, lowered into wells, placed in graves, or hidden within walls so that the words would gain power and reach the forces they addressed. The tablets contained a wide variety of curses. Some asked for a love rival to be punished, causing them to lose their beauty or become sterile. Others appealed to the underworld gods, wishing to paralyze the tongue of a witness in court or render a political opponent unsuccessful. Still others demanded the death of an enemy, the words wrapped around the victim's name like chains, binding them to the world of the dead. Curses found in Roman baths, amphitheaters, and circuses were considered particularly terrifying. There, people left tablets to curse a rival charioteer, a gladiator, or a crowd favorite. The texts retain words full of venom. May his eyes be blinded. May his bones be broken. May he lose his strength. These lines testify that even entertainment in Rome was imbued with hidden magic, and success depended not only on skill, but also on secret rituals. Sometimes lead tablets were pierced with nails or bent, as if tying together the victim's fate. They were left in tombs, believing that the spirits of the dead would convey the words to the underworld. Archaeologists have found hundreds of such tablets, each carrying a piece of the Romans' fear and hatred. But there were other, even more mysterious texts. Some tablets were written in mirror script or strange symbols resembling a mixture of Latin and Greek characters. This was believed to be a magical code that enhanced the power of the spell. There were also images of demons, snakes, or gods of the underworld accompanying the text, like curse seals. For the Romans, this wasn't something marginal or rare. On the contrary, such practices were part of everyday life. Even educated people, senators, or merchants didn't hesitate to resort to magic when it came to fate, wealth, or love. Behind the glitter of civilization lay the belief that fate could be bound by letters inscribed on cold lead. Today, the discovered tablets read like whispers from the past, the voices of people who lived in fear and thirsted for revenge. Some lines sound almost mundane, others like curses worthy of ancient tragedy. But they all remind us that Rome was built not only on laws and swords, but also on faith in mystical powers that could decide the outcome of human life. The lead tablets remain a symbol of the dark side of Roman faith, the side where words were turned into weapons and hatred took on material form to haunt the enemy even after death. The predictions of the Sibylline books and their disappearance in late antiquity. Among the greatest mysteries of ancient Rome, a special place is occupied by the Sibylline books, collections of prophecies attributed to priestesses who allegedly heard the voices of the gods themselves. According to legend, they came to Rome during the reign of Tarquinius the Proud. An old woman, known as the Cumaean Sibyl, appeared to him and offered him 9 scrolls containing predictions about the fate of the city. When the king refused because of the high price, she burned 3 and offered the rest again for the same price. Tarquin refused again, and then 3 more scrolls disappeared. Only after the 3rd visit did he agree, but he bought only a third of the original collection. This myth alone gave the books an aura of dangerous power. Part of their destiny was irrevocably lost in the fire. From then on, the Sibylline books were kept in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and guarded by the priestly college of the Cindicimviri. They were opened only in exceptional circumstances, when Rome was on the brink of disaster. According to ancient authors, it was in them that people sought answers when the city was shaken by earthquakes, epidemics, or terrible omens in the sky. It is known that after a series of eclipses, the books ordered the introduction of new cults of gods to Rome, including Cybele and Apollo, to appease fate. Thus, the prophecies directly influenced politics and religion, changing the face of the empire. But the mystique of the books lay not only in their content, but also in their secrecy. The common people were forbidden to see them. The texts were read only by select priests, and then retold to the authorities in fragmentary form. This gave rise to legends that hidden within were lines foretelling not only disasters, but the very end of Rome. Rumors circulated that the Sibyl predicted the fall of the empire and the advent of a new faith that would sweep away the old gods. The fate of the books was as mysterious as their origin. In the 4th century BC, they burned along with the Temple of Jupiter. It was said that the Senate sent messengers throughout Italy and Greece to collect prophecies similar in style and restore the collection. But whether they were authentic remained a mystery. They were subsequently rewritten and transferred several more times until they finally disappeared in late antiquity, in the 4th to 5th centuries AD, when Christian emperors saw them as a threat to the new religion. Today, historians debate what exactly the Sibylline books contained. Some believe they were political texts created by priests to consolidate their power. Others are convinced they contained genuine ancient prophecies, possibly based on Eastern mystical traditions. But the fact remains, the disappearance of the books has deprived us of the opportunity to understand what secrets they concealed. The legend of the Sibylline books still haunts the imagination. Their story combines Rome's pride, fear of fate, and a sense of loss. It's as if, at the very heart of the empire, there always lay a text that could tell the truth about its future. But that truth has vanished into the mists of time. And so the disappearance of the books is perceived not as an accident, but as a sign. The prophecy came true in that the prophet disappeared, leaving only a shadow of his secret. The cult of the Lares and Manes, Roman spirits of the dead haunting the living. For the Romans, the world of the living and the world of the dead were never separated by a solid wall. They believed that the souls of ancestors and the dead not only lived side by side, but also actively influenced the fate of their descendants. In everyday life, every Roman felt the invisible presence of Lares and Manes, spirits who were worshipped but also feared, as it was believed that if neglected or insulted, they would transform into malevolent forces that haunted the living. Lares were revered as benevolent guardians of the hearth and family. Their images were placed in special niches called laria and decorated with wreaths, flowers, or figurines. On holidays, they were offered wine, bread, fruit, and sometimes the blood of sacrificial animals. It was believed that as long as the Lares were pleased, the family would live in harmony and wealth. But if they were forgotten or desecrated, they could turn into vengeful spirits, bringing illness, discord, and poverty. The Manes were perceived as more distant and mysterious shades of the dead. They were honored during special festivals such as the Parentalia, when Romans would visit their graves, light a fire, and leave food. This was believed to appease the souls of their ancestors, allowing them to remain silent and undisturbed. But legends held that if the Manes were forgotten, they would rise from their graves and haunt homes, transforming into tormented ghosts. Fear of angry spirits gave rise to many rituals. The Romans believed that souls could appear in dreams, leave cold touches, or even drop objects in the house. To protect themselves, people recited incantations, sprinkled wine or milk in their homes, and struck copper objects to ward off ghosts. A more sinister custom also existed. On certain nights, the owner of the house would throw black beans over his shoulder, believing that the shadows would follow them and leave, sated with the gift. At the same time, the cult of the Lares and Manes was associated not only with fear, but also with memory. For the Romans, it was important that the name of the deceased not be lost, as oblivion was considered a second death. Therefore, home altars and public festivals were a means of maintaining contact with ancestors, preventing their spirits from becoming enemies. Historians and archaeologists find evidence of this cult everywhere. Small statues of Lares in the ruins of houses, inscriptions on tombstones, and references in literature. But behind this lies a much deeper idea. Rome lived in constant dialogue with the dead, and this connection was both sacred and unsettling. Legends of sinister phenomena associated with the Manes were preserved in later sources. It was said that entire houses were emptied because residents heard footsteps and groans at night, and some saw figures in white shrouds. Such stories fueled the belief that not all spirits were pleased and not all agreed to offerings. The cult of the Lares and Manes is one of the most terrifying layers of Roman religious tradition. It reveals how strongly ancient people felt the breath of death near them, and how they tried to tame it, turning the memory of their ancestors into a ritual and the fear of the dead into a rite of worship. For them, the world of the living and the world of shadows always remained intertwined, and every forgotten spirit could one day return to remind everyone of its existence. Phantom chariots that were supposedly seen in Rome after the executions of gladiators. Majestic Rome boasted its Colosseum and other arenas, where tens of thousands of spectators avidly watched the deadly gladiator fights. For the people, these were celebrations of strength and cruelty, but beneath the glitter and noise of the games, the Romans sensed something dark, as if the very ground beneath the arenas was saturated with blood and beginning to give birth to its own visions. Later sources and folk legends said that after the executions of gladiators, ghostly chariots began to appear in the city, fiery, swift, filled with the ringing of invisible hooves and the rumble of invisible wheels. According to legend, they were seen at night on the roads leading from the amphitheaters to the city gates. The chariots raced so fast that the wind raised dust, and it seemed as if the horses were breaking through the stone walls out of the fog. Some stories said that gladiator-like figures sat on them, with wounded bodies and empty eye sockets. It was as if they were returning to finish their final battle, only now their arena was not made of stone, but of the very air of the city. Residents believed these chariots were the embodiment of the souls of fallen warriors who had found no peace. Gladiators died violent deaths, their bodies often not given burial according to the usual rituals, but thrown into pits, or burned without prayers. In Roman belief, such dead became restless spirits whose rage could disturb the living. The noise of the ghostly chariots was perceived as a warning. Blood spilled in the arena does not disappear without a trace, but returns as an echo that is heard even by those who turned away during the final blow. Witnesses claimed that chariots sometimes raced straight through crowds of nighttime passers-by, causing no physical harm but leaving a chill and terror in the chest. People said that, after encountering this vision, a person could become ill, lose their voice, or experience nightmares with images of gladiators. In extreme cases, it was believed that the souls chose a victim, and then the person would soon die under strange circumstances. Archaeologists exploring the underground spaces of amphitheaters found bones in pits and traces of ancient rituals, confirming that the Romans themselves feared the wrath of the dead and tried to appease them with secret sacrifices. But beliefs about ghostly chariots outlived the official rituals. Even after the amphitheaters began to crumble, residents continued to tell of nightly lights and the rumble of wheels emanating from the ruins for centuries. Today, this can be explained by psychology or natural phenomena. The play of light, the echo of footsteps in stone arches, a disturbing imagination. But for the ancient Romans, everything was clear. Ghostly chariots were a sign that the arenas were saturated with too much blood. Every gladiatorial festival left a mark on the spirit world, and this mark could not be erased by time or power. These legends show that even in a society accustomed to death as a spectacle, there remained room for fear and the recognition that life and death are inseparable. And while the gladiators' bodies died in the arena, their shadows continued to roam the streets of Rome at night, reminding the living of the price of their spectacles. The mysterious death of Emperor Domitian and prophecies about his death. Emperor Domitian went down in history as a ruler whose reign combined grandeur and fear. Senators feared him, many of his close associates hated him, yet the people saw him as a defender of discipline and order. However, behind the facade of power, his life was haunted by troubling omens, as if fate itself were preparing him for a terrible end. Ancient chroniclers claim that Domitian's death was predicted long before it occurred, and he lived in constant anticipation of the blow. It was said that as a young man, he heard a prophecy that he would die on a certain day at the hands of a loved one. From that moment on, he became obsessed with fear. He carefully chose his circle of friends, suspected even his most loyal servants, and installed polished stone mirrors in his chambers to see those standing behind him. His anxiety reached extremes. He checked knives in the kitchen, forbade weapons from being brought into the palace, and surrounded himself with bodyguards. But it was precisely this obsession, according to historians, that led to his end. The prophecies surrounding Domitian multiplied with each passing year. Chroniclers wrote of eclipses, which he considered ill omens, of dreams in which he saw his own palace destroyed, and even of strange animals appearing in Rome before his death. According to legend, a few days before his death, he dreamed that the goddess Minerva, whom he worshipped, had turned away from him. For the Romans, this was not just a dream, but a direct sign that their patroness had abandoned them. When the fateful day arrived in September 96, the prediction came true with frightening accuracy. His closest confidants, the eunuch Parthenius and trusted officers, organized a conspiracy. The emperor was caught unawares in his own chambers and stabbed to death, despite all precautions. Legend has it that it was one of his most trusted confidants who struck the first blow. Thus, the prophecy became reality, and the fear that had haunted him his entire life became reality. After Domitian's death, Rome was gripped by a sense that not only the prophecies about him had come true, but also the warnings about the fate of the entire empire. His death marked the end of the Flavian dynasty, and many took it as a sign that the divine will itself had turned against the line that had ruled Rome. Historians debate the veracity of the stories of prophecies surrounding his life. Perhaps they were invented after his death to lend an aura of inevitability to the tragedy. But the fact remains. Domitian himself believed in the prophecies, and this belief guided his actions, intensifying his cruelty and mistrust. The mystical story of his death became a symbol of how no power and no precaution can protect one from fate. The emperor, who held the fate of millions in his hands, found himself powerless before his own predicted end. And this shadow of prophecy still makes him one of the most enigmatic figures in Roman history. Even Rome's greatest rulers could not escape the fear of the inevitable. His death was not simply a political coup, but a symbol of how prophecies and omens lived more powerfully in the Roman consciousness than the power of the emperors themselves. Recalling everything we've mentioned today, we can confidently say that Rome left behind not only majestic arches, roads, and laws, but also shadows in which its secrets dwell. Oracles, curses, ghosts, and vanished cults remind us that the empire was not only a force of reason and sword, but also a world of mysticism, forever hidden beyond the bounds of history.